Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is Agents of Impact call number 59. So I think many of you have been on these before. You know the drill. The time is now to start introducing yourself in the chat. Obviously, who you are and where you're from geographically, as well as your organization. And maybe just in honor of this call, how you are finding alpha in impact or driving alpha in impact, as the case may be. I would love to, let's just jump right in. I'm going to introduce our guests and then we'll have some conversation and we'll open it up to Q&A as Zulema said. So let's bring in Marieke Spence from Impact Capital Managers, who's violated the first rule and is on mute, I see. So you can wave, Marieke, and then get yourself off mute. And Ben, too, Ben Thornley from Tideline, an old friend. Welcome, Ben. You're also muted. So when the time comes, let's all be unmuted. But here's Aaron Rudberg from S2G Ventures, who followed instructions and stayed unmuted. Hi,
David.
Aaron. How are you?
Good, thank you.
And Larissa Quinn from Bain Capital. Welcome, Larissa.
Hi, nice to be here.
Great. Okay, good. Let's Marieke and Ben, let's start off and set a little context. We've been following I guess the series now, Marieke, of reports that Impact Capital Managers has put out. We have a particular affinity for these reports because they're about the alpha in impact, which is what ImpactAlpha is all about. So we've been tracking along for a number of years from the very get-go of Impact Capital Managers. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about what the network is, the organization, and then also the genesis of this report?
Yeah, absolutely. You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on the call. Sorry for messing up the technical side there at the beginning. So it's my first time on one of these. Excited to join the conversation today and have likewise been following ImpactAlpha since its genesis. So it's a fun full circle moment. Impact Capital Managers, we're the leading nonprofit membership association of private capital fund managers who are investing for superior returns, so risk-adjusted market rate returns or better, and for meaningful impact. We started just about 5 years ago today, officially, and we're a membership association and an affiliated field building institute, which was the arm of ICM that participated in this research alongside Tideline. And our very first Alpha Impact report was with Tideline back in 2018, sort of right at the formation of our two organizations. We have today 120 plus managers in the network. Collectively, they represent north of 100 billion in impact-focused capital deployed across North America and beyond. And the mission of the association and the institute jointly is to advance the performance of our members and to scale the impact investing marketplace with integrity and authenticity. And it really, again, we started out, Tideline's really been part of our origin story from the beginning, and, sort of positing that there might be some drivers mapped to the investment life cycle around how investing with an impact objective or lens can be a driver of financial outperformance. Last year, we did a report on actually sort of last part first, looking at exits, right? Finding that 65% of up 230 odd exits across the ICM member network either met or exceeded financial returns expectations. And so now we're kind of going back to that, what was previously a bit of a black box, which is the holding period, and looking at how impact investors do things differently during that holding period. And so we're really excited to dive into all of that with everybody on the call today.
Ben, do you want to just set up a little bit what you found? What I was taken with is, the notion that if there is indeed alpha in impact and value creation possibilities, then that would be something that presumably all fund managers would be interested in, not just impact managers. Was that borne out by the research?
For sure, and I think what illustrated that, David, was we included a mix of managers that originated within larger fund platforms. Think of Bain or KKR or EQT, and also a bunch of impact specialists. And I think we did see that some of the larger platforms with impact funds were benefiting from the work that their peers within the organization had done for many years. They were putting an impact spin on that work, but I think that does signal to us that this is a set of levers that can be more broadly applied for sure. But one of the things that we also found was that impact investors specifically are better positioned to implement many of these levers because they come with a certain intention, they come with certain expertise, stakeholder focus, they come with data and networks that are unique. And therefore, they're uniquely able to deliver the kind of impact value creation that we discuss in the report. So happy to get more into that, but ultimately, we do think the findings could be applicable for many investors and for many companies. And
Marieke, presumably the members of Impact Capital Managers, come in as impact fund managers. So either implicitly or explicitly, they know some of these tricks of the trade. But was there surprises and learnings across the network? Oh, here you are muted again. Isaac, can you unmute Marieke?
Thank you so much. Thanks. Yeah, so there absolutely were surprises. And I think there's so much that's fascinating in this report. And another thing that we really love is that we're beginning to develop with this a little bit of a playbook. We're like discerning patterns, and we're developing a little bit of the lingua franca, right? So common language between LPs and GPs. And we're really excited for those who may be newer actually to impact investing or the concept of impact investing to perhaps utilize some of the findings from the playbook and the report. But one of the things that was really interesting to me, just to call it out, was I think we sometimes talk a lot about collinearity in impact, right? Sort of so much of impact investing can feel like it's just picking the winners in impact from the beginning and then helping them scale and sort of being hands-off in that way. But I think that what we unearthed, one of the findings here was that even when there is collinearity, there's a fund manager contribution piece. There's a special toolkit that impact investors, fund managers can use to sort of squeeze extra impact that is financially material out of those investments. So those working with those portfolio companies. And I'm excited to talk a little bit about how I think S2G on the call today with their case study here felt like that was a play. But then beyond collinearity, right? It's not just finding the inherently impactful, high impact companies and then letting them go on their way. It's really about other types of modalities. So going beyond that growth modality or collinearity to systems change, transformation, building markets for impact, pivoting, taking maybe a more impact agnostic company and sort of developing a new impact oriented business line and seeing how that will actually position the company and the investors for future success. So that was some of the things that jumped out to me as being really interesting and unique from this research.
And that last modality, as you call it, was called transformation, I believe.
That's right.
Right. And just in my role as sort of jargon decoder, collinearity is just the notion that if the business is inherently impactful, then growing the business will grow the impact. It's kind of been a sort of little bit of a holy grail, but you say it's not always the case, and you don't always have such a neat alignment like that.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, and we phrase that as like a growth modality. We don't use that term collinearity as much in the report, but growth modality, and Ben can speak to that too.
Great. Ben, is there anything else you want to set up just about sort of the report itself or the framework, and then we'll jump into the cases?
Yeah, I mean, just to be clear, I think impact value creation can apply to any impact investing strategy, both those strategies that are more commercial in orientation, focused on market rates of return, and those strategies that are more catalytic. We did focus on a subset of this market, which were many of ICM's members and other managers that were pursuing a commercial market rate of return. So we do introduce this concept of financial materiality of impact, which is this idea that before you even get started in impact value creation, it's important to understand the ways in which impact influences financial outcomes. I think that would be the case, frankly, if you were pursuing a market rate of return or a more concessionary rate of return. You'd want to understand the ways in which impact and successfully delivering more impact, deeper impact, longer impact would affect financial performance. But nonetheless, I just want to highlight that for our audience here, that this was a particular focus for us. And therefore, we were really intrigued by the ways in which impact truly was driving alpha, but we think the findings could be more broadly applied in both more commercial and more catalytic settings.
I like that phrase, financial materiality of impact. FMI is the new three-letter word. Yeah. One last thing, Ben, because we've been tracking along together for a long time, and I know Tideline has kind of covered the landscape. I know you did a seminal kind of report on catalytic capital, kind of the other end of the spectrum. And I just want to make clear to viewers, and I think readers of ImpactAlpha sort of well aware that, you know, the spectrum goes, you know, all the way. And there's not one right way to do impact investing. There are many flavors. It's mostly a matter of knowing sort of where you as an investor sit on that spectrum and what your own objectives and goals and expectations are. But just say a little bit about, you know, where this market rate, as you said, or alpha, and you used concessionary, we've been using catalytic, but just sort of expand on sort of how it all fits together.
Yeah, I mean, I think the benefit of focusing on this subset of the market, David, was that that among all the things you can do as an investor, the choices you can make to influence a company's growth and development, if you're focused on achieving a commercial rate of return, you'll want to ensure that your time is well spent. I mean, you know, funds and managers have limited time and resources, limited bandwidth. So they are generally going to try and connect the kind of value creation activities they prioritize to the financial outcomes that will result. So even purely from an academic perspective, that was almost like a cleaner data set for us to work with, because the question we were constantly asking the case study subjects and other interviewees, folks who were speaking to, was how is your focus on impact in this particular situation driving financial performance, driving financial outperformance? And by taking that more narrow view, again, recognizing there are other reasons to implement impact value creation, like to enhance impact, period. But taking that more narrow view, where we would ask our interview subjects to connect what they were doing to a specific financial outcome, I think enabled us to create a more robust framework that's sort of more tightly construed and will be more applicable to folks who are not within our small niche and can benefit from this, even though they may not label themselves as impact investors.
Right. I think outperformance, I think, is the key. And what we've always said it is, you know, if you're an impact investor, you should outperform on impact or financial returns or both, but not neither. So, all right, let's bring in Aaron Rudberg and stick around, Marieke and Ben, and chime in as well. But we want to really try to see if we can, as concretely and sort of granularly as possible, Aaron, you know, how a fund manager actually, you know, contributes to the impact of the ventures and investments they're involved with, and Clear Frontier is a great example, because I believe you actually, I believe you started it, but let's start at a different place. Just tell us a little bit about S2G. I know it's part of Builder's Vision, and we've written up Luke Walton's activities with Builder's Vision, but just tell us what S2G is, and then let's jump into Clear Frontier.
Thanks, David. Humbled to be a part of this group today. So appreciate you inviting us to tell the Clear Frontier story. So S2G Ventures started 10 years ago by Lucas Walton and my partners, really with a focus on how you provide capital and value-added resources to entrepreneurs that are addressing some of the most pressing environmental and climate-related problems. We started with a focus on food and agriculture, and that was really the genesis of the firm and a focus for the first 6 years of our organization. And then over the last 4 years, we've added a focus to both oceans as well as the energy transition. And so today we manage about $2 billion of capital in a typical sort of venture growth equity mandate and fund structure focused on really backing entrepreneurs. Over the last 2 years, we also added a credit and project finance capability, because I think, as many people on this call know, so much of the need, once you get past past the product validation phase and start to see the scale of your business, you need capital to build out infrastructure or other types of capital. And so we saw a gap there in our own companies, and now have a solution there for entrepreneurs as well. And so, yeah, very excited about, where we are today. But also, I think, importantly, 10 years ago when we started the firm, there weren't a lot of sort of active groups in the market. And today there's, I think someone recently told me 1,500 firms investing in and around impact. And so it's exciting to be a part of that ecosystem.
Absolutely. So again, Clear Frontier is a kind of great example of the contribution that an investor can make, because I believe you were involved in the genesis and getting it set up. So just tell us the Clear Frontier story briefly, and then we'll dig into some of the particular levers you might have pulled.
Yeah, so really where the story started was probably about 6 years ago. One of the things we've done as a firm is we have a corporate development group. We've been engaging with large corporates from really the beginning of the firm. And that's, trying to understand what are their needs. As many, again, people on this call know, the oligopolies or the large corporates control so much of the supply chain, the infrastructure, et cetera. And so we said, let's go engage them. Rather than look at that as friction, instead, let's get inside the boardrooms, let's understand what their pain points are, and then see if we can develop solutions or partner with entrepreneurs that can help solve those things. And so about 6 years ago, we were meeting with a number of the big CPGs that were going and buying organic and kind of specialized grain companies for consumers with the consumer demand. And we started talking to their heads of supply chain, and we said, what are your problems? And they indicated in particular around organic grains that their M&A groups were buying organic brands, but yet they didn't know how they were going to supply those grains. And foolishly, we said, well, what if we solve that problem for you? And so we spent the next year, after getting an offtake from one of those CPGs, which they were foolish enough to give us that, we went out and we decided, let's go start a farmland business. Our first initial thought was we will go and we'll invest behind a large farmland manager and bring this problem to them, and hopefully they could solve it, because we felt like part of our job is connecting the ecosystem. What we found is a lot of the big farmland managers essentially said no interest. We don't think that that's a thing. We think it's too small. We don't think we can make money there. And we have fundamentally.
That being organics in that case?
I think it was organics. I think it was anything around sustainability. This was a word that had not pierced through at least their boardrooms. And I think their view was, aren't those hippies that do that? It is a fad. Consumers really don't believe in organic. They don't believe in healthy food. That's going to go away eventually. And we just felt like that was not true. Now, again, we were probably drinking our own Kool-Aid in our own bubble, which I think, as we all probably know, sometimes we all fall victim to that in any sort of bubble you're in. But we went out and we decided, let's go create this business ourselves. And so we spent about 9 months kind of working through business models, ideas. And then we put together a job description, put that out to a number of people we knew in the ag community, and ultimately met a gentleman named Justin Brook, who was a 5th-generation Iowa farmer. He had farmed institutionally. So he was a master's degree in agronomy from Iowa State. So very much a kind of a farmer, but he had managed over 150,000 acres in Ukraine for 10 years. He had been in Canada and managed for the Canadian Pension Plan, about 150,000 acres there. He'd helped them build out their U.S. farmland portfolio as well that was sold to Cascade, the Bill Gates investment arm. And so Justin understood both the kind of the ground truth, the farming, but he also understood the scale that we were hoping to get to. And I think most importantly, he had just converted part of his farm at home to organic. He had not done that for sustainability reasons. His father had handed him his farm, and he said, I don't want to kind of go through the same cycle my father went through, and there's this organic thing, maybe I can make more money there. And it had just converted. Timing, a lot of times in life, is everything. He had just converted after the transition period to organic. He realized, holy cow, I can sell these products so much higher. And so we meet him, and within 10 minutes, my partner and I look at each other and we say, holy cow, this is our guy. He is going to be the leader of this company, because he understood the problem, the challenge, but the opportunity set. And he thought about, how do we scale this to much larger than 5,000 acres or 10,000. And then we spent the next few years building the business alongside him. And initially he spent time living in Chicago. We then moved the company to Omaha, where he wanted to live, and we thought was a better place in the heartland. And we've now built the firm. We've raised over $220 million, acquired 20,000 acres that we're transitioning to organic. About 2/3 of that right now is organic. And we're building out that model and learning every day. But it's, yeah.
Okay, great. And I mean, so there's a few threads to pull on here, but the first is, so just the what it is a fund that, you say acquire farmland, or do you help existing farmers convert?
No, so so that the strategy that we ultimately landed on after, looking at, should we operate ourselves? Should we just do a lease model? How do we want to think about it? Essentially, we buy the farmland. We then find an organic farmer, not always, but someone who, we just backed, for example, a 24-year-old professional farmer who wants to get into organic, and his family didn't want to support him, but we are. And he's, hopefully him and many others are the future of what we're trying to do. And so we will back a farmer, and then we do a revenue share where we take on more of the risk up front, because there's a J curve in this business model, essentially, where the first few years when you're in transition, the profitability is not there, but the onus on the farmer is quite heavy. They're taking a lot of risk. And so we basically said, we'll take that risk, but we will help you. But you've got to share the upside when we get there. And that's essentially our model over time. And then what we're also doing is, when we buy the property, we are measuring the soil health, soil organic matter across the fields. And we are then measuring that every year to track essentially carbon for what could be potentially some nature-based carbon market. I think, as many of us know, it's not necessarily there yet, but our feeling is that over time, that will be something that both corporations, but also could be a tradable asset for the farmer.
Yeah, that's coming up in the chat as well, so maybe we'll get into that. But just in terms of the contribution that you as an investor made in the venture, obviously you helped set it up, so that's key. But an obvious one is you staked it to its presumably to its first investment that helped bring in other investors.
I think go ahead. Well, I think sort of a little bit of everything. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't want to overstate our impact on the business, because I think, as many of us know, the entrepreneur is upfront. They are the ones, every day, the blood, sweat, and tears. And I think Justin and that team have done an incredible job. We've helped to hopefully not get in the way on a lot of occasions. But what we've tried to do is everything from providing operating capital up front. So it was an idea. Justin left his job where he was well paid. We convinced him to move to the US and Chicago initially, which he, that transition in a big city versus kind of smaller city wasn't a natural one for him. So we helped him with that risk and hire a team. Essentially, again, operating capital. We then staked the business as an LP, essentially, in the fund. We were able to be his first investor, help him buy assets. Initially, we bought the first few assets. And, there's stories there where we were literally closing on the asset, but we hadn't even closed on any of the capital, and we had to figure that out and set up bank accounts. I think when we set up our first bank account at Chase, it was the retail banker at Chase around the corner from us who, when we told him we had $20 million to put in, he was like, "What the hell are you talking about?" I remember looking at him. He was like this 24-year-old kid, and I thought to myself, I think we're operating at the wrong level here. But it was his day. What he didn't like is when he went out the next day to buy the farm. I think he was like, "Wait a second, my career aspirations just vanished." But we did everything from the operating cash. We're the first LP. We introduced Justin and that team to somewhere between 50 to 100 different investors around the world that we thought could be aligned, and just needed to hear his story. And then we also helped with establishing some of the ESG and impact measurement capabilities as well. Introduced him to technologies. I think it's featured in the report, a few technologies that are in the market, some of which we're invested in, many of which we aren't, that we thought could help him better run his business. And then get out of the way, right? Give him the space to run the business and not be someone that's, a burden.
One more thing, you sort of passed over it, but you said you secured an offtake agreement early on from one of the big consumer packaged goods companies, which provided some security that there was a market there.
Yeah.
So that's a function of the kind of connections you have across the ecosystem. But that's obviously a key thing that an investor can do for one of the companies, right?
Yeah, I think, that's signaling, especially when it came to investors, LPs. I think, there was a leap of faith that investors are making in the sense that, can you sell this for a premium? I mean, I think we all see it when we buy organic goods or regenerative, anything that's a specialty grain or any specialty product. But that signaling helped us secure a number of investors up front. And, I know that, again, a lot of us are out there pushing a boulder in many cases up a hill. I mean, there were moments where, despite the offtake agreement, despite a lot of the signaling, I'd be on the phone late at night with Justin, just trying to make sure he was, he had a sounding board, because it's not easy when you're trying to change the future.
Marieke or Ben, are there other things that came out of the case study research that you did on Clear Frontier and S2G that jumped out at you as unique?
Yeah, I mean, I think Aaron touched on it. The network that S2G had built over a long period. I think we talk about some of the other introductions to technology providers and other experts in that field that S2G was able to bring to the table. So definitely, we were seeing in that case a lot of the key ingredients that I mentioned earlier: strong intentionality from S2G, really excellent expertise, networks, and attentiveness to stakeholders. In this case, those stakeholders were the consumer packaged goods companies, and a good understanding of core elements of sustainability. So it kind of all came together with Clear Frontier, and kudos to the S2G team.
Last question. You made the point, Aaron, that you helped them sort of establish metrics and ESG milestones and whatnot, and maybe soil carbon levels and things that will become useful. Were those sort of impact driven, or do you think there is a financial materiality of impact element to that kind of metrics and measurement?
Yeah, I mean, I think we start with, given our kind of who we are, I mean, we start with everything's got to have a purpose as part of it. But at the end of the day, it's got to be about driving markets forward. We're big believers that if you really want to drive change, there needs to be a market mechanism that is supported. And so we're working on some things, even on the side, that are trying to create nature-based carbon markets. And, because this is a systems, there's systems friction, system issues that we have to conquer and overcome. And I think we've got a pool of capital that can help to, grease that if you need to, and lower maybe the obstruction. So I think for us, so much of establishing that for Clear Frontier, I don't want to necessarily say that we know the answer on whether those things are going to be the right metrics. But I think the view is, if you don't start from the beginning and learn, and we've even in the last 2 years have learned on some things we were doing early on that aren't necessarily indicators of impact or success. But you've got to sort of put a stake in the ground, and then over time, learn from your mistakes or lean into things that maybe cost a little bit more money, because the belief is over time, the market will recognize that of value.
Great. There is a question, and we're not going to really open it up to questions yet, but it's on point, from Ellen Frank Miller, about whether some of those KPIs or metrics involved sort of human capital and particularly, farm workers.
Yeah, I think one of the things when we started this business, you start with sort of what are the things that core tenets that you want to believe in. And, we have a very strong view that farming communities in this country are being left behind, and that we are not focused enough on helping those rural communities. And I think COVID showed us all that in a very raw way. And so we wanted to, this is again back in 2018, 2017, we wanted to make sure the farmer was at the center of all this. How do you drive profitability and the community, and build that community and showcase that, you can be a different type of farmer, and more people want to be like you, as opposed to just a conventional farmer. And so we do measure that. We think about, we look at the demographics of our farmers. Happy to say that a majority, I think, of our farmers are actually female. as well, identify as female. And I think those are things that are really important to us. We're also looking at age demographics, which are really important. And so, with the average farmer age, I don't have the latest data in front of me, but, farmers aren't getting any younger. And families, generally, the younger children in those families are moving to more urban environments. And so we really can't lose, I think, as a society, these farming communities, and they're a core part of our ethos. And so we did focus on that from day one.
Great. Well, thank you, Aaron. Stick around and engage. But let's jump to Larissa Quinn from Bain, and Larissa, Bain obviously is one of the big guys that Ben mentioned, where over the last few years obviously have raised, I think now 2 double impact funds. And so maybe you just give us the little bit of context on double impact, and then let's jump into the is it Excelsia example.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, David, for having me today. So yeah, as Ben mentioned, Double Impact is part of Bain Capital and is the impact investment strategy. And so, our approach really is to, just as Ben talked about, drive that competitive returns alongside scaling impactful mission-driven businesses. Our team has grown a lot since inception. In 2015, we tripled in size, and we've made 25 investments across these 2 funds. So our approach is we invest on basically 3 themes: health and wellness, which I'll talk about today. That's where the Excelsia case example fits in. Education, workforce development, and sustainability. The fund was really established with these 3 themes in mind, and that has remained consistent over the course of really the 2 fund investment cycles. I will touch on, because Ben mentioned this, value creation is so incredibly important to Bain Capital as a whole, and we really have taken that same approach in the Double Impact Fund, so much so that we have a whole team dedicated to doing value creation in our Double Impact portfolio, myself included. So I am on that team who focuses every moment of every day on value creation with our portfolio. And we really invest in companies where impact is core to the business model. And so, as the business grows and, we expand, the impact scales alongside it. And that's a thematic that is present in many of our companies. And we do see a direct correlation between impact initiatives and value creation. And so that is something that we have really embraced.
Well, actually, before we get to the case study, just because you brought it up, and Ben raised it at the beginning, if there is indeed alpha in the impact and value creation is key to everything Bain does, then have other parts of Bain adopted impact levers of value creation, because presumably because they're not necessarily because they're impactful, but because they create value.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that there's obviously a lot of cross-pollination in the thinking of double impact across the rest of Bain Capital. One particular area that has really sort of just expanded tremendously across the industry in general, but I'd say within Bain Capital in particular, is the focus on ESG and the consistency of our approach. And so, the elements of ESG have been embedded in the double impact approach really since inception. That really has become quite ubiquitous across the market, but I'd also say has been a really interesting, collaboration with Bain Capital at large to really establish what is it that we're doing at a kind of total Bain Capital level as it relates to things like, consistent measurement, consistent goals across ESG, across the whole platform. And a lot of the things that, we had kind of done just organically through Double Impact really have taken on kind of a much, kind of bigger focus within Bain Capital.
Terrific. Pre-pandemic, we called that effect infect the host. that the impact processes would migrate to more broader. The metaphor sort of didn't resonate as well in pandemic times. So, but let's jump into Excelsia, and I think it's a little bit of a growth, if I understand it right. Is it a growth example in this context? So just tell us how you found them and then what you did with them.
Yeah, and I'll start just with what the company does first, just to kind of level set. So taking the patient or the constituent perspective, for people who are lower income and are uninsured or underinsured, if they get into a car accident or have a workplace injury, finding affordable and effective healthcare is actually incredibly challenging. Patients are worried about how much it will cost. They're worried about, where do I go for care? Who are all the specialists I need to see? And how do I manage that complexity of being reimbursed through the insurance process, which can be very complex. And so what Excelsia does is they basically solve that gap between the patient needs and the healthcare system, and provide the full continuum of care that patients need to rehabilitate and return to pre-injury status. And they do that regardless of the patient's insurance status. So basically takes anyone, irregardless of their situation, and then helps also manage and navigate that reimbursement process through, it can be multiple insurance, or their employers, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what the company does. We saw that this is a really interesting business model, and many of our healthcare companies are business models that solve these gaps in the healthcare system. And we saw that this business model had the potential to scale beyond its geographic context. So the company, when we invested, was in the Mid-Atlantic. So it was Maryland, Virginia, and Delaware. And we saw that this could really be a business model that existed at scale in other geographies. And so we're very excited to reach more patients and kind of help them with their expansion approach. And so that's really the context of the investment and really what we've been focused on to date. And I would add, in addition to that, really, because it is in the healthcare sector, and we started talking about some of the employee dynamics, we saw an opportunity for Excelsia to be an employer of choice, and for that to be a big part of where we spend our time and investment on the impact side, to ensure, because it's such a reinforcing loop. You have a thriving employer of choice, you attract good talent, and it really creates an excellent patient experience. And so we knew that that was a key component of how we were going to get to the growth story.
Let's just make sure we understand actually the business, but are they providing the care, or
they are providing the care? So it's,
oh, they do provide the care.
They have, and within they employ medical doctors, orthopedic, neurology, physical therapy, basically everything along the kind of cycle of rehabilitation.
Oh, okay, so geographic expansion, and then that's a function presumably of some investment that you made, and a plan they put together to go national.
Yeah, so we have expanded. We've actually close to doubled the number of locations from, it was about 35 when we started, and now is 65 and still growing. We have entered 2 states, Pennsylvania at scale with over 20 locations there, and then have just recently entered Missouri as well as a beachhead into the Midwest. And we do believe that this model at scale could be in many other states, and so we're aggressively pursuing that expansion strategy.
Great. And then the rest of it, you said, was like employee wellness of the employees of Excelsia, as well as obviously the employees who've been injured and hurt.
So I'll talk a little bit about that. So our approach with employees in across our investment portfolio is to out of the gates do an employee survey to understand, how we can increase engagement, satisfaction, some of the, what are the issues and challenges facing the employees. And like I said, because this is a healthcare provider, there are some physicians and, and medical providers, but there's also a large population of frontline hourly workers who, this is a tough job. This is, interacting with patients who are under a lot of stress, and a lot of the hourly workers are really evaluating trade-offs between staying in healthcare and even, we've seen migration to other industries that, are just frankly easier day to day. And so, what we want to do with this employee population is create engagement, but also create the programs that they really needed. So one of those that was core to our opportunities that we had identified was financial stability. So what we did was we basically worked to evaluate the percentage of employees that were paid a living wage. And then we worked with the management team to basically say, okay, if we're below 100%, what would it take to get all employees to that living wage level, and then map out a plan to get there. And that's something that we have done. The other component of this financial stability that was really important is putting in place programs to support financial, kind of support cases of financial uncertainty. So if there's a financial hardship, unexpected costs from, you name it, car repairs or, kind of their own medical bills, whatever it may be, we put in place, working with external providers, employee relief funds that are available to all employees anonymously. They can apply for grants to, kind of take that pressure off to cover emergency situations. We also implemented, along the same kind of theme, a payroll smoothing program so that workers can access their earned wages more frequently than paychecks. And so, all of this really to support our employees in their greatest needs, but also doing a lot more in terms of engagement. How do we, just recognize employees regularly and create the resource groups needed and that sort of thing. Just, everything we can do to truly make Excelsia a great place to work and a place that retains and can recruit easily the best talent in the markets.
Great. So that I guess would be more if I get it right, Ben, a system level lever to pull, and I think this employee engagement and sort of quality jobs strategy. I know there were several others. HCAP, I remember from the report, has that strategy. So my question would be the same, which is some of those things are like, I think giving employees praise doesn't actually cost much, but some of the other ones might actually raise some costs. And the question again is there a financial materiality of impact on that? Does that actually pay off, or does that just is that just good, being a good employer, and it actually you just eat the higher costs?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, well, I mean,
you go first.
just quickly, David, one thing I wanted to point out is interesting, some of the case studies that highlight the systems approach. So Larissa's example, as well as the example of HCAP with Better Night, the example from Two Sigma Circle of Care. I don't think it's a coincidence that they're all in the healthcare sector. This is a sector that's hugely reliant on frontline workers. And during the Great Resignation in recent, prior to the last couple of years, I mean, it, retaining, motivating, training healthcare workers has been a huge need. And so, Larissa can probably share more, but there's no question in my mind that it's provided Bain a huge, financial advantage in this situation.
Yeah, I would echo that. I would just say, healthcare is a space where turnover can be very high, in particular for those roles that, are just hard. They're front line. There's a lot of stress, and and, you know, they don't necessarily require advanced degrees or medical degrees, et cetera. And so, you know, like many other impact initiatives, we see this as good business, and, you know, we are fighting for talent every day. We see the value in the business side of it as well. I'd say also that, so yes, on the kind of recruitment costs and retention, that's all really great. I'd also say that one piece of this that maybe isn't as apparent if you aren't living and breathing the business is the impact on the patients. And happy employees, engaged employees who are well-trained and have been there for a long time make a huge difference in the patient experience. And one of the things that we really strive to do is, you know, create an incredibly good patient experience with high NPS scores. And we track that, you know, and make sure that that's really good. You really need, you know, employees who like the organization, who want to be there, who are very engaged in order to day-to-day, like, kind of make that come to fruition.
Great. You're I just want to let you opine, if you will. You're in the value creation team. So even besides this particular example, what are your sort of favorite value creation levers, or as Ben would say, levers to pull?
Yeah, I would say that there is definitely a big focus that we have on the growth dimension. I mean, a lot of the companies we invest in, our founder businesses, you know, have a fantastic track record and really needs to add some fuel to the fire. Something that goes kind of along that same line is really investing in the talent in the organization. And so, you know, as we grow and scale, often there's a lot of infrastructure we need to put in place. So I would say growth is probably the biggest one that I focus on day to day. And, you know, there's a lot also around the systems that we you know, kind of put in place, employees being a really big one. So actually, I'd say that thematics are pretty in line with the Excelsior example.
Terrific. Okay, so let's open it up now. Send some questions in the chat, and I want to just bring Ben and Marieke back to sort of recap a little bit and maybe add any additional context, or if you have questions to ask each other, Aaron and Larissa, you can go at it as well. Ben, what's your summation here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it, well, I mean, you can hear from Aaron and Larissa the level of effort that goes into this. I think that once you become aware that there's incredible opportunities to create impact value, and it does have financial materiality, I think it becomes something that is therefore prioritized, and the best managers will invest in, create teams, really lean into looking for opportunities to be more active, more engaged owners of their companies, and seeing the linkage between impact and performance. So I think what we need to encourage the market to do is make those kind of investments, to take the time to come to appreciate the kind of research that Ellen's highlighted in the chat, you know, to understand that there's this low-hanging fruit in some respect, you know, just creating better jobs, in the case of what the example Larissa was sharing, that can drive, you know, outperformance and better customer experiences. And I think that in the case of many of the levers, I think there are those opportunities that are there for the taking, and we just need to take the time to really lean in on developing that expertise, developing playbooks, using them, tracking how that's going, and really communicating with entrepreneurs and founders and companies about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and finding these kind of opportunities. So I think that we've tried to create a taxonomy to help make that an easier process for investors to look down the list and literally identify places where they think they can lean in. And we'd encourage all investors to take a look at the report and think through the levers that we've written about, David. Marieke?
All right, I couldn't resist.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. I mean, it's always fascinating. I always, we work with our 120 members at different times, at different days. I always learn something new by going deep into these types of cases, right? So it's so awesome to hear from Aaron and from Larissa on this too. And I again, our members at ICM are really working across different sectors and verticals, but we're beginning to see some really interesting patterns that are emerging in terms of what are those levers that they can pull, what is financial material and what is not. And really quickly, I know we've got another question in the chat. Want to make sure we leave room for that. But just even in the case of employee assistance funds, right? So we see more anecdotally, I see more ICM members deciding to, irrespective of their impact vertical or theme or focus area, sort of say, hey, this is a great idea, right? Sort of reframing, thinking, the whole sea change around quality jobs and workers, and reframing around just from a cost center, moving from a cost center to really think about worker productivity, right? Retention, attracting great talent. And I feel like so much of the conversation today has even touched on finding the right talent, access to talent and networks, the importance of networks like ICM, Jim, and others as well, and others, like access to capital, the right type of capital at the right time, the Acelero case. And I think BIO is on the call today. So BIO, WK Kellogg Foundation, Builders Fund, sort of synergistically coming together the right time with the right kind of capital. So that's sort of what I take away from this. I'm super excited for people who are a little newer to impact investing to sort of say, hey, I identify with that. I can sort of lean into that from the report, and we'll see how it might change people's behaviors going forward and their returns.
Yeah, I think that kind of shared language, as you say, is key, so people can sort of know they're talking about the same thing. Larissa, Chaz Walker in Atlanta put a question in that sort of put a little more point on the question I was sort of asking, which is that there is kind of a perception that private equity, broadly speaking, has involvement in healthcare, has in some cases harmed the quality of care and maybe employee satisfaction as well. Can your model be adopted across the healthcare system? Does ImpactAlpha provide sufficient incentive to change the current PE playbook?
Yeah, and I want to actually, this is great because David, you asked a question about other levers, and I didn't mention one really important one, which is the incentives and the metrics behind it. So one thing that we do that I think really gets us all, kind of moving in the same direction with these organizations is the first thing we do is out of the gates, we establish what those impact metrics are that we're driving. And so for Excelsia, some of those were around growth and expansion, but some were actually around, for example, patients completing course of treatment, right? Which is incredibly important to outcomes. And we've tracked that in patient surveys even. And also expansion into communities in need is one of our metrics in terms of % of low-income population access. So these metrics we set, and then we actually link a portion of the management bonus to achieving the goals of these impact metrics, which I think, first of all, kind of sets the focus out of the gate that these are crucial to the success of the company, but then also keeps everyone moving towards ultimately delivering on the value creation that we set out to do, at the beginning of the investment. And so I think that incentive piece is something that's been very effective in our model, and we do that across the portfolio.
And that's incentives for the
management team.
Or also incentives for the team at Bain.
I will say we track these, kind of pretty ruthlessly to make sure we're achieving them, if that's your question. Absolutely. And also, yes, the management team has a direct incentive to achieve these goals.
Right. Just to press one more round on it, the question, I think it gets to the point of which we were talking about earlier, which is is there enough value creation on the impact side to change the sort of paradigm, as it were, that of where value creation, historically or traditionally has come in PE, which might have been through restructuring or layoffs or other kinds of cost savings?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes, and it's why I think on the impact side, David, we're going to see, impact value creation hasn't been as much a focus of conversation, just to be sure. I think that was why we felt the need to do this research. But an analogous market, and I don't know, we're not focused on it, but the ESG market as an example, I think if you go to ESG conferences these days, I mean, it is all about value creation. And I 30% of private equity firms had a head of ESG, 3 or 4 years ago. Now it's 80% or whatever. I mean, it's just, there's been an explosion of the growth and professionalism of that sector, not only because of compliance and other aspects of ESG we all know and love, but because there's real opportunity there.
Real value there, yeah.
And I think that's what we're seeing in impact as well. I think as people become more adept at creating impact value and the evidence becomes more irrefutable that it drives performance, I think we'll see the development of the kind of teams that Larissa is part of and the kind of work that Aaron's doing. So yeah, really exciting, because it means that companies will be better supported, returns will be better, employees will be happier, and customers will be better served. So better impact, better performance.
The virtuous circle.
Just to build on that real quickly, David, I think I love the idea, and we talk a lot about moving impact measurement from a compliance function to a value creation and kind of markets function. I think that's something we need to do. And we get asked many times by large asset allocators, would you take a discount on your carried interest or profits interest for impact? And then impact maybe is some mechanism within that. And what I always ask is, do you also pay your non-impact managers a lower rate of profits interest for the negative impact they're making on the world? And I think that we as agents of change, that's the name of this panel, I think we need to be reframing these conversations so that we're not seen as concessionary or negative, that this is actually where the future and the opportunity set is.
Right. Hey, it's the top of the hour, so obviously if you have to jump, feel free, but we'll keep the call going for another few minutes, just to make sure we've heard from everybody. And I know, Michael Scanlon, you've had your hand up, so you're the brave soul who's actually going to jump in yourself. So what's your question?
Well, thank you very much, David, and great to Impact Alpha. And really, Larissa and Aaron, on both sides, the terminology ESG impact. To me, I'm in the professional business, raising capital institutional investors all day long. They don't want to hear that word most of the time. And I'm not sure if it's red or blue. Definitely my Texas and Florida folks, they like the word sustainability, because that to them means there's a value proposition. It's sustainable and hopefully improving, not degrading. Can you answer your thought process on the verbiage you have been seeing in your business?
So language question.
Yeah.
I think go ahead, Larissa.
Yeah, sure. I completely understand the question. And I think, first of all, sometimes there's even confusion between impact and ESG and what's the difference and, et cetera. I think the way we tend to think about it is that impact is really what the company does. It's fundamental in the mission of the business. And, that's the screen we have when we are making the investment. We also think about, maybe you don't want to call it ESG, I don't know, but we also think about how the company does what it does, which is really the practices, including things like employee wellness and sustainability, et cetera. And so again, I think that sometimes there isn't always alignment on exact language to use, but we do think about how the company does what it does and all of the leverage you can pull to both, create value through that, like I talked about the employee piece, but then also to, just kind of support good business practices. So, we sort of use that terminology, and that helps us frame, what the work is ahead on the value creation side. But Aaron, I'll let you chime in.
Yeah, I think that maybe to build on Larissa's point, I think the way we approach it, one is, we know who we are. We were started 10 years ago as a purpose-driven firm to invest behind sustainability and health. That's the language we used from the beginning. We consider ourselves an impact firm. But I think it's important, as we've talked with lots of co-investors, asset allocators, in trying to get them to invest behind this, really the future that we need for the future of our species, not necessarily the planet. The planet's going to be fine. It's our species. We need their capital allocating. And I think what we try to do, whether they're red, blue, purple, in different parts of the world, is use the language that's going to kind of touch their heart and minds, and not necessarily make this a political discussion or anything like that. So, Michael, to answer your question, we do a lot of research on that to try to understand the dynamics they're under, and then, frame the discussion really about the companies and the purpose of what they're trying to do, and then use whatever language they want to hear. We go to Europe, they want to hear impact right up front. Go to the Middle East, they want to hear about food and energy security. And so I think it's all the same things. When I've walked the halls of Washington, D.C., I've met with back-to-back Republicans and Democrats. Literally back-to-back, we talk about the same companies in those sessions, but we use different language. And they all get excited about what the companies are doing. But if you mention climate to, on one side of the aisle, they will walk you out of the room. So you talk about innovation and science and technology, and they get really excited. It's kind of, I find it an interesting dynamic over word choice that sort of is meaningless.
Yeah, but it is to Ben's point, if firms are increasing, their attention to ESG and impact and measurement, and they're seeing value there, it kind of does cut through some of the political noise. And we've talked about, other firms adopting these practices, but it also sort of takes it off the table of politics and makes it just about doing good business, as you've all said. So let's close the formal conversation. If anybody wants to have a sort of last word, I'm happy for that. And then, as I say, we often just leave the room open, and I try to put myself on mute and let folks talk. But if anybody has a final thought that they want to get out, now's the time, and then we'll send folks on their way. Larissa or Aaron or Marieke, or
Keep up the good work. Keep up the good work there.
All right, thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. I mean, David, it would be remiss not to thank all of the investors who were among our case study subjects. We also had some wonderful funders of the research, including Builders Vision, not S2G and Aaron's part of it, but Builders Vision Forward, as well as Kellogg and Annie Casey. So I just want to give a shout out to them, because without that support, we wouldn't have been able to do it. So we're really grateful for that.
Great. And we just want to reiterate too, thanks to all of you. And Tideline has been a long time friend and ally in all of this, and very helpful, and Impact Capital Managers as well. And Larissa and Aaron, thank you for joining and subjecting yourself to the questions and all. So and thanks all to the agents of impact on the call. So as I say, I'll put myself on mute. We'll leave the room open. If you want to keep going in the chat, feel free. But we'll see you next time.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much.